Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Let's Talk Safer podcast. My name is Myriam Perrier, Vice President, Research and Development at Perrier Consulting. It's my privilege to co-host this podcast alongside our partner in the 1% Safer journey, Robert Stewart, Director of Science at Intactix Systems. Hello, Rob.
Hi, Myriam. I'm equally honored and excited to launch our podcast discussing safety issues with industry thought leaders who bring their wealth of experience, best successes, and concrete solutions to our OHS questions.
Before we introduce our guest today, I'd like to shed some light on the 1% Safer Foundation, for which Perrier Consulting and Intactix Systems are the Canadian ambassadors. For those who don't know what is 1% Safer, it's a nonprofit foundation who aim to reduce fatalities in the workplace. It's a fabulous movement based on the concept of marginal gains, where a cumulative effect of small daily action can lead to significant improvement over a year. If we all do just one thing, just 1% every day, mean we can get better and better, and this can save lives of thousands of people each year. Perrier and Intactix join their forces to promote this worldwide movement.
Together in this podcast, we'll dive into risk prevention and the complexities of workplace health and safety. I'm excited to talk about how we can collectively elevate safety practices across Canada and make a significant positive impact.
Welcome to Let's Talk Safer podcast, where one conversation at a time, we shape a safer future. Hello, everyone. So we're super happy. It's our first episode of the Let's Talk Safer podcast. Our first guest is no other than Professor Andrew Sharman, the founder of the movement, 1% Safer. So first thing we're going to do today, because it's the first episode, we're going to have Andrew share with us what is the movement exactly, why is it so important to do a little bit better in safety and save the people that are unfortunately going to die from working accident. So Andrew, I let you share with us all about the movement.
Right. Thanks, Myriam, and thanks to you, Rob, for inviting me to join you on this first podcast of Let's Talk Safer. Thank you also to Perrier. As a group, you're wonderful at being our Canadian ambassadors for 1% Safer. We're proud to work with you and very impressed with the activities that you're doing across Canada. I know that you care considerably about the world of health and safety at work, and so we're very pleased to partner with you in the 1% Safer Foundation.
Thank you very much.
I'm going to just kind of share some thoughts that are in my mind about why 1% Safer is an important way to think about generating improvements in safety performance and safety culture. And I should caveat all of this with just something very simple, that when I say the word safer or safety, I'm referring to the most broad definition. I don't just simply mean physical injury like broken bones or amputated fingers. I'm also meaning occupational ill health, work-related well-being, what's going on inside our heads, as well as what's going on to our physical body. So when I talk safer, please think about this broader definition. So I think that we need to do something, and we need to do something urgently, because we have a problem in the world of health and safety at work. And the problem is this: 2.78 million people lose their lives every year through work-related accident and work-related ill health. Now, that number hasn't really changed over the last few decades, although some news streams suggest that the number may have gone up a little bit in the last few months to somewhere near 2.9 million. I want to stick with some easy sums here to get our heads around at the beginning. So 2.78 million sounds like a simple number. I'm sure we're all shocked to think about that many people dying at work. But what does it really mean? And I think we need to break it down in order to understand. It means 7,616 people die every day because of their work. Now, that's a more digestible number. The way that I digest this number is I think, wow, my goodness, that's almost the population of the town that I live in here in Switzerland. It's my entire town wiped out every day. But other people might prefer to break it a little bit more. It's 317 people every hour of every day. 317 every hour. Okay, so that's starting to become a number that we can get our head around. But let's try it just one more step. I want you to count with me from 10 down to 1. Follow the numbers. So in the 10 seconds that just elapsed, someone else lost their lives due to workplace injury or work-related ill health. One person every 10 seconds. Now that's a frightening statistic. I'm sure Rob right now is doing the calculation of how many people might likely lose their lives whilst we're on air on this podcast. It's an astounding number, and we must do something differently about this. The number isn't changing, and it's on our shoulders to take action. And I think the real issue is that for such a long time, we have not been effective as leaders in safety. Too many leaders, and they tell me this of their own admission, as well as my own observations working with clients around the world, they go out and do leadership safety walks or Gemba visits. If you just think about that for a moment, a senior leader arrives on a shop floor. The blue collar worker looks at the senior leader and thinks, oh my gosh, I better say the right thing here. The leader says, do you have any safety issues? It might be quite hard for the employee to say, actually, yeah, I've got a long list of things. I've just been waiting for someone to ask me. So more often than not, the response to this question is, no, everything's fine. And the leader walks away. Now, I've been working in the field of safety culture and safety leadership for nearly 30 years, and this question has been part of that experience, and I'm on a mission to change it. I'm on a mission to change the way leaders, by leaders I mean health and safety practitioners at all levels because they have leadership influence, and I especially mean operational leaders, CEOs, COOs, department managers, regional vice presidents, directors of sites. We all have an obligation to make this change. And so a couple of years ago, during the coronavirus pandemic, I came up with the idea to use my network of thought leaders around the world and to create a compendium of best practice ideas to really provoke some different thinking. And the idea was simple, that if we could make a 1% improvement in the numbers that I've just talked about, then that would be significant. And so I invited a whole bunch of thought leaders from more than 40 countries around the globe to contribute 500 words as one chapter of real kind of golden nugget wisdom. What's the most important thing that all leaders need to know? And incredibly, over 140 people said, yeah, I want to be part of that. So instead of 100 chapters, we've got a little bit more, which I hope makes it even more exciting and interesting. I'll come back to the book in a little while, but I just want to kind of talk about this idea of marginal gains, because let's imagine that if we just keep doing what we're doing right now, in a year later, we'll be more or less in the same position, won't we? If we do 1% better each day, we're in a significantly different position in a year from now. The cumulative effect of 1% more each day is incredibly powerful. Of course, we could do nothing. We could just let it drift. But I know that's not an option for the people who are watching this podcast with you today. So let me just show you those numbers again. We do nothing, we stay the same, we get the same result. A small, consistent effort every day means we make an improvement of more than 38 times where we are now. Now, that number still may not be persuasive enough, so let me try it in another format. 1% improvement from where we are right now, every day, day after day, day on day, day on day, a year from now will be 3,800% better than where we are right now. Now that's an improvement worth shouting about, isn't it? Now, and this isn't a novel idea, by the way. I've got to tell you, Einstein came up with this idea of compound interest. The 1% is built on the previous 1% and on the previous and on the previous. And so this idea of this powerful force of marginal gains of compound interest can make a real difference. Let's go back to those numbers again. 2.78 million dead every year. If we made it 1% safer right now, that's 28,000 people that are not killed by their work in the next year. 28,000 people like you and like me. And we've got to do something towards that. So 1% Safer started life as a book. It's a very big book. It weighs about 1 kilogram. I've designed it as a kind of coffee table book for health and safety. It's got provocative graphics. It's got simple chapters. It's written by some of the biggest, sharpest minds in safety, in academia, in policy, and in corporations around the world. But it's more than just a book. We run community events, getting practitioners and leaders from around the world to come together to share their ideas on how to make the world of work 1% safer, sharing with the contributors to the book as well. And that's a great melting pot for ideas. 1% Safer is a charitable foundation, which means every cent that we get from a sale of the copy of the book goes into the 1% Safer Foundation, which then we give out in terms of grants and bursaries for people that want to create a better 1% safer world of work. And one of the ones I'm really proud of at the moment is working in partnership with the International Institute of Risk and Safety Management, where we've given money to support 200 bursaries in developing nations around the world to help OSH practitioners in places like Kenya, Ethiopia, and beyond become better practitioners, have more impact. And then, of course, there's things like World Day for Safety and Health, which is coming up soon, isn't it? In just a couple of weeks' time. Last year, we ran an entire week of event working in partnership with you, Perrier, and our other ambassadors around the world. And I know that you've got lots of great things planned for this year's World Day. So it's more than just a book. It's a movement. And I want to end this kind of intro with this quote that comes from Daniel Kahneman, the Nobel Prize-winning psychologist and economist. He says what you can hope for is what's called practically significant improvement, which is usually just a few percent. If you get a few percent at a relatively low cost, then that's a success. So we've got Einstein and Kahneman saying, look, this seems to be a sensible way forward. And so I advocate the approach of 1% Safer to you and to the listeners to this podcast, and invite them to buy a copy of the book, knowing that all of the money that they give goes directly into that charitable foundation. I invite them to join the movement. Go to 1%safer.com. And I invite them to join us on social media. We're very active on LinkedIn. Search for us at 1% Safer or with the hashtag 1% Safer and find out more and get involved.
Wow.
Yeah, thank you so much, Andrew. I'm always impressed. I will never cease to be under shock after this presentation, no matter how many times I'm gonna listen to it and think of the people. It's crazy. It really needs to change. And all this introduction really leads us to the topic for today, because we are going to talk for the first episode about really like critical incident, fatalities and serious accident that take place in our Canadian workplaces. And about that, Rob is going to show you, for the ones that are watching it, and the other ones we are going to describe the statistic that is the opening point of the topic today. So Rob, I let you share with us about what's going on here in Canada and the few questions, and one question in particular that you thought about that we need to ask Andrew about.
You bet. Well, it's so exciting, Andrew, to hear the passion behind the movement and the direction that it's headed, and really the desire to make a change with it. And since I've been involved with the 1% Foundation as a new ambassador, and I've been out talking to my various clients and people in industry on this and speak to them about the numbers. And I guess this goes to more fundamental issue around the question as well, is I hear a lot of excuses like, well, you know, those are third world nations. These are things that are happening, you know, in Africa, that sort of thing. Certainly not the first world nations sort of thing. So even though they're shocked at the numbers, and they understand the need to change, it still comes back to, you know, my own organization, what it is that we're doing here. And I look at the fatality numbers as well. Yes, there's a focus on that, but I think a lot of people forget that behind those fatalities, and certainly this is a Canadian statistic, for every fatality, there's about 11.2 serious injury incidents that happen. So these, and when I talk about that, as you know, these are, you know, brain damage, paralysis, loss of major limbs, major lacerations, permanently life-altering type of things that occur. So this is a massive, massive problem that's there, and part of the 1% Foundation talks about it, as well as the impact on the economy and GDP aspects there. So there's a massive, you know, human toll, there's a massive economic toll that's going with it. And then I look at Canada itself, and I'll just share the slide with you here. Because Canada is very much a laggard out of certainly the OECD members with it. And these are our numbers from 1993, basically to date. And the trend is just going in the wrong direction. And when we look at these, we're averaging about 980 fatalities every year on average. And like I said, about 11.2 times that amount are serious injuries. And we just can't seem to shake this. And I was in a presentation 2 weeks ago, and it was with the HSE out of the UK, and they were talking about their fatality stats and things were happening. And it really struck me, because when we look at their numbers, it's quite dramatic. Let me just shift this here. So last year, they were sitting at 123 fatalities, and it had increased to 135. And what struck me with it all was the absolute outrage over it all. They were passionate, like, we have to change this. There's things that we have to do with it. And I'm thinking, wow, if Canada had 135 fatalities, we'd be celebrating. There'd be dancing in the streets. But we're not getting any response from this at all. In fact, I posted these statistics on LinkedIn and at the Canadian Society of Safety Engineers, where, you know, most of our safety professionals are. I think they have about 8,000 members on LinkedIn. And I got nary a response from, I think 7 people responded to it all. And more of it was about questioning the statistics in comparison between how Canada compares statistics and the RIDOR stats that are there. And so I look at this, I look at the trends. We've known about it a long time. Here, what are other jurisdictions doing? Like, when I look at these numbers compared to the UK, Australia, the European Union, what is it that Canada isn't doing, or what is it that we should be doing that other jurisdictions are, to really give the nudge to say, you know, we can and should be better? And I think it becomes more jarring when we look at the UK, because demographically we're about the same. We have the same sort of high-risk industries and things in place, but we're sitting with a population of 38 million, and they have a population of 67 million. And yet the results are shocking in terms of performance. I'd love to get your insights and input on this.
Yeah. Well, look, I should tell you that I'm neutral, in the sense that I'm not here in the UK. I'm here in Switzerland. I'm originally from the UK, but I've been living and working out of Switzerland for 15 years now, and working globally with experience in more than 130 countries. My life tends to be moving around the world with the clients of our consulting practice. I'm filling for time here, Rob, because I have not seen this data before, and it has just blown my mind, the 2 charts that you've just shown. The first one, I made a note here, in 1993, 758 fatalities. In 2021, about 1,000 fatalities. My quick calculation is that means that the fatality rate in Canada over the last 30 years has gone up by 30%. I can't think of any other nation that we call a developed nation. You used the phrase third world, and we talked about developing nations a moment ago. But if we kind of put Canada in with other countries like UK, Australia, USA, European nations, I'm completely blown away that the trend line is going up so significantly. And then just when I thought I couldn't be more shocked, I was looking at that UK-Canada comparison. And Canada's almost half the size of the UK in terms of population.
Absolutely.
but has 7 times the number of workplace deaths. So, gosh, something's got to change, right?
Well, this has been my challenge. It's why I'm so excited about the 1% Foundation and the movement that we have to create in Canada. I mean, we have a real challenge. We have a redemption story that we're looking at here. But when I present these numbers to Canadians, what I get is, well, it's excuses. Well, and what they would reply to you to what you're saying is, well, you know, Andrew, our exposure hours have gone up. You know, so that's why you're seeing the increase there. You know,
look, Rob, you know as well as me, we can't have those excuses. The time for excuses has gone. We're killing too many people at work, and the people that we're killing are people like you and me, hardworking people who come to work, who want to do a good job in the most part, and then go home to be with their loved ones. And no number of fatal accidents at work can be acceptable, which is why you hear the UK getting so concerned that they've gone up from 123 in 2021 to 135 in 2022. That's devastatingly bad news for people in the UK. So I think what you're trying to do here in your partnership with 1% Safer is you're trying to create some momentum, some awareness, some discussion, some dialogue, and that's the point of these Let's Talk Safer podcasts, of course, isn't it? And so. Yeah. If we think about why it might be, I guess my initial answer is I don't really know. I'm not Canadian. I don't live and work in Canada every day, and I want to be very careful to state up front that it could be easy to fall into the trap of saying, well, Canada's broken in terms of health and safety at work. I don't think that's the case. I've worked with many Canadian corporations. I have many Canadian OSH professional friends, and I know there's a lot of great work that's done in workplace health and safety in Canada. So we need to be careful not to kind of fall into the hole of despair here. That it's the worst. I mean, I know that 5 deaths every day in Canada is a heavy toll. But I think what we've got to do is 2 things. One, we've got to be clear that action needs to start now, and it needs to start with us, whoever us is, me, you too, and everybody else that's watching, and then everybody else that they work with. It's got to start with us. It's got to start now. And I think the idea of marginal gains that I just talked about with 1% Safer, I think that could be a way forward. Now, I'll pause here because I know some people might be reacting to that thinking, is this guy nuts? He's just told us that 1,000 deaths a year in Canada can't be tolerated, and now he wants to make a 1% improvement in that. I do. 1% improvement every single day, and in a year from now, we'll be 38 times better than the position we're currently in. So I think we've got to take incremental steps. I think for many OSH practitioners, that's quite a novel idea. I know lots of OSH practitioners and leaders who want to make big safety improvement plans with multi-year procedural changes and activities. And there's a new activity almost every week that was going to make the difference. And I think that that's caused a sense of overwhelm for leaders in organizations to kind of take on board the latest safety initiative. And so I think what I noticed that other countries like the UK, like the US, like Australia, like European nations are doing is that they're kind of refocusing. So it's not really about the numbers. We've already made the point that the numbers need to change. But I think there's too much focus on numbers in safety generally, too much focus on lost time injury rates or accident frequency rates. And so discussions about safety within organizations tend to be about the outputs, the accident rates, rather than the inputs to great safety culture. And so I think some of these other nations that have better by comparison accident and fatality rates have made that shift from thinking about just preventing accidents to instead doing something that I call in one of my books, From Accidents to Zero, I call it creating safety. So it's about the creation of the safety culture rather than just trying to stop the bad things happening. And this is a fundamental mindset shift from preventing accidents, a focus on failure and trying to avoid the failure, to creating safety, a focus on the success inputs. So what are the things that cause us to have a good day at work, to cause us to work well, to work safely, and to go home safely? And so I think maybe that's part of the shift. I wonder if that's it. Does that resonate with you?
I
If I can intervene here, I wanna share a little story because it happened just a few days ago, and everything you said just it resonates very much. We were with team of a corporate team, and they were we were starting a project with them, and they contacted us and they said we want to make sure like the human capacities, like what we sometimes call the soft skills. Well, that's another topic I could discuss. Like, is it really soft skills or is it just skills that you should have in safety? But they were contacting us to get help on that. So we told them, let's meet first and see like how are you going? Like, what's your direction in safety and how you want to integrate it to the work? So we are with the president, there's a vice president, and then we talk with them about how they could improve, and we advise them and they share about their experience. And at some point, they talk about their structure. They have so many activities, just like you just said. And then it comes to the point where I ask them how we need to define what is it you want to measure? What is it you want to follow? And the impactful stuff. And so we start talking with them about how they go and discuss with worker about safety and what do they do in their own role of president and vice president. So we were talking specifically with these two guys. And the vice president suddenly says, oh, I have to be very honest right now. I don't go and talk about safety with the people, the worker. And I go look at the operations, quality, production. I'm really like involved in these things. So when you talk about a 1% improvement, that this person just starts integrating a little bit of safety, not becoming like a safety professional from one day, like overnight, but that this person starts as a vice president to incarnate their leadership is a improvement of, I think, more than 1% for them, but it can make a big difference for these workers to start at least hearing about safety from the people that lead this business. What do you think?
Yeah, look, I think it's hard for business leaders to engage in workplace health and safety in a meaningful way. I think health and safety is a dull, disinteresting, and unsexy topic for many people around the world. I was on an aeroplane just a couple of days ago, and I sat down and I was dressed in some business clothing, and the guy next to me said, "Oh, are you traveling for business?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "What do you do?" I said, "I work in health and safety." And he looked at me and just shook his head and then opened his newspaper and carried on reading. Now, we have a fundamental reputation management problem in health and safety around the world, and that's not helped by some occupational safety and health practitioners who make health and safety a black art. They make it rocket science when it doesn't need to be. And they do that, I suspect, to try to preserve their own job and their own sense of being a guru or an expert. And I think what we've got to do as a profession is unpack that. We've got to help business leaders, whether they're VPs or CEOs or department managers, we've got to help them see that great safety leadership isn't something that only people with degrees and masters in health and safety can do. Great safety leadership is actually just great leadership applied to safety. And therefore, if we repackage like that, we see that it's just about behaviors.
That's a fascinating experience you had, Andrew. I run into it all the time. It's this safety exhaustion that they've had, and I don't know if we've gone too far. Because the people that I talk to, the CEOs, they say, we have all this safety. We have more safety than we've ever had before. They haven't delivered on the promise of better business, higher productivity, less turnover. We've got greater bureaucracy around safety, and it's actually costing us money, and we're not seeing the results that we should be seeing. And that's a hard thing to overcome. And There's coupled with that as well as the fact that, when you go and talk to some of these large organizations, their numbers may say they look good. I remember I was consulting with BP at the time of BP Texas City, and we did our first research project with the University of Calgary after that event. And most of the major oil and gas companies we went out to said, that's not us, that's BP. And it was only Shell at that time that said, you know what, we do exactly the same sort of work. We have the same safety management system as BP. That could easily have been us. But that was one out of close to 30 major oil and gas producers that we spoke to. And Shell was the one that took on and said, yeah, let's engage in this. But it's a real fundamental problem. Like I said, safety is something that is over here. If something bad happens, these people take responsibility for it, and we just continue on. We got to sort of disrupt that thinking that's with it. Part of it is it's not me, it's them, because it can be them.
I think that's part of the problem. We always think that the bad stuff happens to other people. I'm 50. I turned 50 in October last year, and last year, almost a year from now, in June, it'll be a year since the anniversary of my best friend Mike's death. He was out cycling one day with his 2 young kids. He was 50, just same age as me, was out cycling, came home and was incoherent when his wife started talking to him. She rushed him to a hospital, and he died a couple of years later from a huge brain tumor. And I would never have thought it would be Mike that would die of brain cancer. He was super fit, super healthy, thought about looking after his health a lot. And I would never have thought that one of my friends would die, just like I never think it's going to be me that gets sick. And so I think the same is true at organizational level. It's easy for organizations and their leaders and their OSH practitioners to look over there and say, oh yeah, they got it wrong. We don't. And the reason that happens is a sense of overconfidence because of the data, the output data.
Yeah.
That they look at their accident frequency rate charts and they say, haven't had a lost time injury for a year now. Aren't we doing great? And the problem is that they're not looking at an LTI chart. They're looking at an LGI chart. They're looking at a looking good index.
Yeah.
They're not interrogating data. They're not saying, hey, why have we not had an LTI for a while? What are we doing that's causing that? Where were the last few LTIs? Where are our near misses currently? Where are the employee suggestions on safety coming from? What do we need to be thinking of given the next quarter or the next half year ahead? The resource implications and the activity implications. Where might there be some risks that might come and bite us up that we don't know? Because if you think about it, it's not about having more safety, to use the language that you just quoted. It's about having a stronger safety culture. So you talked about oil and gas and BP. It's almost the anniversary of Deepwater Horizon, isn't it? On the 20th of April, 2010, 11 men lost their lives in an explosion on the Deepwater Horizon rig in the Gulf of Mexico. 17 others had suffered life-changing injuries and were sent to hospital. And all of that happened on the day that they celebrated 7 years without an LTI. Now, call me cynical, but surely that can't be the case, right? It can't just be perfect and then you kill 11 people. And in fact, if you go into the inquiry reports, you'll see that the US National Commission said there was a problem of culture on that rig, that leaders didn't set the right tone from the top. They didn't establish appropriate expectations or goals for safety. What was the goal? Well, it was 0 accidents. The focus was on the output data. And as a result, you can imagine a rig celebrating a year without an accident puts a bit of pressure onto the shoulders of employees. We better not have an accident. And if we do, we better not speak up. And the more that clock counts up, the time since the last accident, the more pressure is placed on the shoulders of workers not to speak up if there's an issue. And that's not just unique to the oil industry. In September 2014, in the city of La Porte, Texas, the DuPont factory there had a release of methyl mercaptan gas that killed 4 people within minutes of each other. And again, the US Chemical Safety Board response is almost identical to the National Commission inquiry on Deepwater Horizon. They said, what we see here is a problem of culture in the corporation of DuPont. And so this is not more procedures, it's not more safety, it's better safety culture.
But don't you find, especially that, I mean, you brought up so many interesting things that we could talk about here, Andrew, but the DuPont one fascinates me because DuPont had a whole division, their sustainable solutions, that are around developing and helping other organizations build safety culture. And then you have the regulator coming out saying, within your own organization, you don't have a safety culture. So maybe there's something fundamentally flawed with that methodology and things that are there. And I think the other item that you brought up that really sort of tweaked for me was, yes, we have this black box of safety. We've made it complicated. They don't know what it is. Our senior executives, because they're exhausted with safety, are disconnected. They only sort of get involved after something bad has happened. But maybe part of the movement is to get them to start thinking critically about these numbers that are being presented to them. Like, how does a total recordable incident rate tell me that my facility is going to blow up? You know, what is it that we're actually doing that is going to make us safer or not? That, like, they need to be more actively engaged in, you know, even the methodology of how we do safety. Because I look at, and we do a lot of evaluations. We were just with one company here the other day, and they had 153,000 proactive reports that came in. Most of them, Andrew, were things like, you know, the paint peeling on the wall, there's a battery on the step, don't stand down when a Bob because he hasn't bathed in weeks. And about less than 1% of them were things that were really, really serious, but they're not even looking. They're not investigating. They're not, it's almost like this is a silo. We're expected to do this because it's a leading indicator. So we're going to do lots of these, but we've lost the purpose behind it. And my senior executives aren't asking the fundamental questions: why are we doing this? What is the intent? What is the outcome that needs to come from this? How do you further action that?
I think you've just described what the problem is, Rob. You've just described the problem, and you've even done a great job of labeling it. You said it's about doing safety. It's not about doing safety. You can't do safety safely, but you can't do safety. And I think there's been to do is switch to a mindset where it's not about the number of accidents. It's about what people do. It's about the behaviors, the mindsets, the attitudes, the values, the beliefs. And it's about bringing this to the front and saying, this is why safety is important to us. It's important because we care about our people, because we have a site here of 150 people and we like them all. Or a leader standing up and saying, safety is important to me because I suffered a fatality in a previous company and I don't ever want to go there again. It was the worst moment of my life. And then explaining how that impacted them. And so it's a deliberate and significant shift from being a box checker or a box ticker to being a leader at every level in the organization. It's not about doing more safety. It's about working more safely. And that's a very subtle but very important shift. And it's not about those metrics and the accident numbers. And every time a leader or an organization says, let's talk about the accident numbers, OSH practitioners need to say, sure, I can tell you what those are in a few minutes, but let me tell you first the stuff that you really need to know about and think about. And then the OSH practitioner needs to provoke some deep and meaningful dialogue about the safety culture. And then as an add-on, you can say, oh yeah, by the way, our numbers this month, this. But let's be clear, the absence of accidents does not mean the existence of safety. Like, I'll give you a great example of this. I told you about that flight I was on. When I drove back from Geneva Airport to my house, that takes about 35 minutes. I drive through a couple of small roads and then back along a freeway or a highway. Hey, I didn't crash my car during that journey. Does that mean I was driving safely?
Right, yeah.
No.
Of course not. Of course not. So the absence of accidents doesn't mean the existence of safety. So we've got to stop this over-reliance, overconfidence that leads to complacency by focusing on the numbers, and instead start focusing on the inputs to great safety culture.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
you know, we need. Sorry, go ahead, Myriam.
I want to say something because the way we're going is so good to reconnect with the movement. 1% safer is not about, it's about doing. It's about 1% better. It's also like, I think I have another little story. I was thinking about that when you were saying, Andrew, about ticking boxes. There was a client in the consultancy we were doing. huge risk. They were constructing a bridge, so that's high risk, of course, and it was not going so well. But the person that called us, very high in the hierarchy, said, I have problem because all my stats are so good, but we almost killed someone last week. So what happened after is we went there with them, and at some point in all of this, one of my colleagues was one of the directors, and he said, okay, let's go on the field and let's go see what's happening. And we're gonna go and check about the behavior, we're gonna interact with people, we're gonna be proactive, and I'm gonna support you, coach you. Anyway, the person goes in front of a board. They say, okay, we're gonna go and do interactions, we're gonna go talk with people. Perfect. And he starts picking like about 20 protocols on different risks and things that he was maybe going to see. And why was he doing that? It was to tick the boxes and then put the protocols in the system and say, oh, okay, we checked that and we checked that. And then my colleague said, what are you doing with all these papers? Just leave these papers there. No paper today. We're gonna go interact and talk about the behavior and just create a nice impact, a good impact on people, and talk about the real things. No paper, no system, no statistic for today. I don't say that it's bad to record the quality and the good things about an interaction, if that's what your business wants to do and it's really meaningful in the way you measure it. It's not what I'm saying now. It's just when it's like doing safety, we're gonna go do safety, take protocols, come back, and we're gonna be happy with this. Sometimes even with not talking with the people, not even talking. So why do we think we could create an impact with that? And if I bring it back to the 1% safer movement and what you said, Andrew, about your friend died and you never thought it would happen to you. And I think it's really true what you said. Big business owner, even small businesses owner, they don't think it's going to happen to them. But what I can see happen to them is being a little bit better in action. I think the human has this capacity of seeing themselves improving. And I think that's a good starting point, maybe, in the discussion.
I think it's tough, Myriam. And not that I disagree with you, whatever. When I look at safety overall, I mean, it's pretty simple. You know, especially when you look at HRO type things, it's a preoccupation with failure. How do you instill that in their mindsets, especially at the senior level? And overall, you know, how do we create an environment which, you know, problems are detected early and always respond to prevent serious incidents, which means, you know, workers have to feel comfortable reporting, and then the organization has to respond by putting in corrective actions or maybe an investigation. It's very, very, very simple. But then I see things, and it goes to this black box that Andrew's talking about, where all these really colorful brochures, and this is our plan for this year, and I'm reading through it and I'm going, I can't put my finger on it. Like, the information you're telling me is not wrong, but it's just over the top. Like, I don't know what you're trying to say to me with all this. You've taken this very simple sort of, this is all we have to do is identify problems early, make sure that they're fixed, to this massive, massive bureaucracy of stuff that is there. And some of this, I think, is maybe just going back to the fundamentals, you know, is what it is. And I see some of this as well with our workers. When I have 150,000 proactive reports and less than 1% are about things that could seriously injure or kill people, that's a concern. So why are they doing all this stuff? Why? And if workers, you know, if the premise is they don't come to work to be seriously injured or killed, then why aren't they telling me about things that can seriously injure or kill them? Why is it when I go out on a job site with a COO, we spot, you know, a half dozen of these things within 15 minutes? Like what is happening there? What is the disconnect that we have to bring back towards this? And this is where I come back to my question: was this seems to be happening elsewhere, But in Canada, where we're focused, it's not occurring.
But it's happening because you're just describing what's happening, and you're promulgating this attitude. So you guys have got a big responsibility here to change the way you talk about safety, to change the way you focus on safety. So we've talked about doing safety. We've got to change that. It's about doing work safely. We've talked about checking and getting 1,500 ideas, or the CEO going out and checking. It's not about anybody checking anything. That's not going to stop 1,000 people dying in Canada this year. It's not about more checks. And I'm making an assumption here as a start point that most of the people that are watching this podcast are smart, intelligent, progressive OSH practitioners. And so for them, in their companies, they've probably got some pretty good safety management systems in place. They've probably got some good policies and procedures. So the next step is not more policies and more procedures and keep getting all the leaders to check adherence to policies and procedures. The next step is saying, how do we shift from being focused on our systems to being focused on our humans? And that shift is not about, let's just check more fire extinguishers or people wearing safety glasses or that the fire door is not locked. It's about engaging in meaningful conversations between leaders and employees and asking meaningful questions, not like, have you got any safety issues, or do you have any safety suggestions? Right. It's about leaders showing humility and saying, I don't know anything about this process that you're working on. Can you explain to me how this works? Can you tell me about the safety risks? Can you tell me what you would do to make sure that you won't get hurt? If I were working with you, what would I need to know about safety? I think curiosity is the key to unlocking the situation that we've described at the head of this call, these 1,000 people dying in Canada. But not just curiosity, it's humility. Having that ability to say, I don't know about this. I don't know what we should do here, but you, employee, you're the expert. Help me learn from you. Because that's really powerful. When a leader says to a shop floor worker, you're the expert, help me learn. And then they actually close their mouths and open their ears and listen carefully. So we've got curiosity and humility. You get those two right, and what happens normally is it starts to build trust. And the reason that you've described this situation of got all these procedures, got all these policies, got all these check boxes, but still you're killing 1,000 people. The reason, I suspect, and it's only a guess, there may be thousands of Canadian OSH professionals that disagree with me. The reason that you're still killing as many people is that there isn't a culture of care in these organizations. It's a culture of compliance, and it's about ticking boxes and focusing on output data. And to get a culture of care, employees have got to have trust and faith in the leaders, and that includes the OSH practitioners. And trust is the output of curiosity and humility, amongst other things.
And I couldn't agree more. I think that's where it has to go. And I'm not sure about other jurisdictions with this, but I'll give you an example here in the city that I work in, Calgary, Alberta. And we had a worker that was going to go to work, and he was going to go into a trench that wasn't short or sloped. And he was, telling his girlfriend about how dangerous this was. And, his life was at risk, and his plan was to leave the organization. They had told the organization that, they need to have shore boxes. They need to slope this stuff properly. And he went in and did it anyways. And unfortunately, he died. And that's not the only incident like that. And back when I worked with BP, they had me to be a safety ambassador to the schools to go out and educate the students on about safety at work. And one of the things they wanted me to educate them on was the right to refuse unsafe work. And it was like, are you kidding me? Like, I get it, but the psychology, the social psychology of risk behind that is really, really challenging. And you guys control the work environment. Why are you putting them into a situation where they have to make that risk-based decision to begin with? So these things are known. Like, some of this stuff we've known for hundreds of years, how to prevent these, but we're ignoring them. And so the culture of care, the aspect that has to be there. And then what is the competing factor? Why did the organization not have a shore box or slope it? What's the cost of doing that? What other organizations would come in and shortcut? And, the normalization of deviancy, we've done it before, both with the organization and the worker. I'll get away with it until one day we don't. And then everybody starts pointing fingers. That's the part that we have to bring the stop to. We have to have that preoccupation with failure. We have these things in place. You shouldn't put your workers in that sort of situation. And
sure, but Rob, you're attacking the fundamentals of this again, and I understand why. But going back to asserting the rights of workers to speak up if they find that something's wrong, that's a problem of leadership. Yes. And I admire organizations who want to contribute to society by talking to kids about the importance of safety. I think that's great, but it will not fix the problem that you guys have in Canada right now. It will not fix it. What will fix it is different action by OSH practitioners and decidedly different action by the leaders in businesses. Yeah. And so that's where we need to focus here. And it isn't about more paperwork, more procedures, more policies, more compliance, more checks. It's about leaders being brave enough, being vulnerable enough to say, why is safety important to us here in this organization? And none of the bullshit of because people are our greatest asset or because safety is our top priority. That's nonsense. That's nonsense. Just why is it important? And for some leaders, it might be, I heard a CFO recently said, hey, look, safety is really important to our business because every time we hurt someone, that's bad for business because it creates downtime, which creates more cost, which has then a backup cost of replacement labor and fines and penalty and lost time and investigation costs. So safety is good for business because if we're safe, we don't have all that additional cost. And a whole bunch of people in the room said, that's shocking that you say that. But it's not shocking. That's just the CFO's perspective that beyond the human tragedy of people getting hurt, it's bad for business. So I think one of the things that maybe professionals could do, OSH professionals could do, is count up the number of LTIs that you have and then work out what that's costing your business. So as an example, the United Nations, the ILO and US OSHA indicate that a lost time injury could cost around 100 to 150,000 US dollars. I'm sorry, I don't know what that is in Canadian. I feel a bit embarrassed about that, but about 100 to 150,000 bucks. And so if a practitioner were to count out the number of LTIs they have, then you could kind of start to be a bit more persuasive. So if you had 10 LTIs, you could say, well, that's cost us 1.5 million in poor safety this year. And then you could work out what's the margin that we make on our business revenue. So let's say the margin's 10%. Now you could go to your board meeting and say, so the cost of our accidents was 1.5 million this year. Our margin for our business is 10%. That means we'll need to make an extra $10.5 million next year just to cover the costs of our poor safety this year. And I'll tell you what, that certainly gets the attention of a board when they think we've got to sell another 10.5 million worth of products in order just to cover the failings, the costs of safety. And so I think OSH practitioners might do well to reflect on their own skills at communicating with the business on the broader business perspective and why safety is good, and going beyond just talking about the data.
It's so interesting what we just said, and we're coming to the end of this discussion already. That's absolutely crazy, but I cannot go without saying what you just said, Andrew, about the safety professional being knowledgeable of those things that are important in business. It's so important, and I think we're on a good I don't know how to say in English, but like on a good way, a good piste here, because in Canada the training of safety professional is so technical, and it may be like this elsewhere as well. But this winter I'm giving a course in a university with a safety professional that are going to be the next people supporting organizations in safety. And when I had to teach them about how to construct like prevention plan and things, and I'm not like so passionate about this plan and safety and all. I'm more in the human aspect, leadership, culture, everything we discussed. And when I told them that the work they had to do on this plan was not to make it compliant, but make this plan accessible and easy to use, and and good on the workplace. And when even more, when I told them, you know, that safety, it doesn't really exist. And I was obviously taking my inspiration with Professor Honnegel, that is one of the contributor in the 1% Safer book. And they were kind of under shock. They were like, this plan needs to be compliant, and I'm gonna give you a compliant plan of safety. And I'm like, this is not, you're gonna have zero, you're gonna have bad grades. Don't do it. It's not what I'm asking from you. And just trying to make them move away from that procedure, plan, safety this mindset is already like a challenge. So I hope that the listeners today can take that have that take about what you said, Andrew. And also, I was in a other podcast that is pretty popular in France. I was invited. I was a guest in this podcast, and at some point I said to the person, I said, safety professionals need to know everything about the business they work in. And the podcast has been running for years. It's been running with experts, people like very awesome, great people. And he said, you know what, Myriam, no one ever told me this. And it's very interesting what you're saying. And I said, you cannot be a good safety professional if you don't know what's the work, what's the business, what's the number, what's the profit. You need to know even like how much you lose when you stop like the operation, and what are the important like central stuff of what the people are doing in this business. And why don't we hear that more? And I think that's where we're going forward. Like we're going towards that, the important stuff that is central to the business and the work, and knowing that we could work safe. So
I'm sorry to contradict you here, but I disagree strongly. I disagree strongly. I don't think OSH professionals need to know everything about their business. I think that's a wrong step too far. I think if we take extremes, on one hand, we have the OSH professional that's focused on compliance and technical procedure. And on the other hand, we have the OSH professional that needs to know everything about the business. It's neither of those things that will fix the problem that you've articulated clearly at the start of this program. I think it's about the OSH professional committing to making him or herself 1% better at their job every day. And I think it could be quite scary for some OSH professionals to think, well, I take quite a traditional take on safety. How on earth am I going to suddenly know about the whole business? I think what they need to know is, how does OSH contribute to the success or the failing of the business? And who is it in the business that are the KPIs, the key people of influence that the OSH practitioner needs to interface with to recruit them as ambassadors for a change in the way we talk about safety, for an articulation of why we do safety, and a shift in the way that we support the creation of a safety culture, moving away from compliance to care. I think that's what OSH practitioners need to do. They don't need to become masters of every business process. I think that's a definite wrong step.
Yeah, I agree. But sometimes, people that are really strongly some people are so strongly like in an extreme, and they never heard of nothing else, and they truly believe that's like, they genuinely think it's good what they're doing when they come with more structure and more systems and more papers and bureaucracy, like we said. So sometimes just bring them, like showing them something very different. I had many people that I work with said, I like, it's a 180 change from my perspective, and it really helps me to open myself to others more than my actual paradigm. So that's more like where I was heading forward, because I think it's important like to see through other lenses.
There's room for seeing through other lenses for sure, and there's room for provocation. I think that we need to be careful in the way that we position the step change that I'm sure the three of us are agreed, and that it's not about all or nothing, just like the 1% Safer book. It's not about let's get to zero. It's about incremental progress, marginal gains. And so my last comment, because I know that we're out of time, my last comment would be to encourage listeners to this podcast to reflect on their intention versus their impact. All OSH practitioners that I've ever met have the same intention, to try to stop people getting hurt at work. As I've talked about, a retrospective focus on trying to stop failure and prevent accidents will not take us much further forward, and instead leads to overconfidence, complacency, and a creation of a safety definition that's all about failure and compliance. And so instead, think about, how do you get more impact? What do you need to do as an OSH professional or a leader in an organization to have more impact around the safety culture agenda? And that means things like curiosity, humility, building of trust, creation of meaningful dialogue, and a definite deliberate switch in the words that we choose to use whenever we're talking about safety, whether it's on a podcast, in a client meeting, or on the shop floor with the people that actually know what's going on, the people that are doing the work.
I don't know how to say thank you. Like it's so good to have those discussions and argue a little bit, and then hoping for actually shaping a safer future, like the title of our podcast. So thank you so much to you, Andrew, and also Rob. Amazing input today, and I hope everyone that listened to that can go and really try to do better.
Yeah, and I want to say thanks as well, Andrew. I think this certainly set up a lot of more conversations that need to occur around this. There's a lot of different topics that you brought forward that need to dive deeper into it. So certainly, thank you so much.
With pleasure. It's been an interesting discussion. Nice to see you. I wish you well for the rest of the podcast series. Thanks again for supporting 1% Safer.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.